They voted me out of my own damn company between the second and third cup of stale conference coffee. No raised voices. No last-minute appeals. Just a scripted, monotone, effective immediately from the board's lawyer and a few averted gazes from the same people who used to pass me a turkey leg every Thanksgiving. My wife, sorry, board member spouse, didn't say a word. She just folded her hands neatly on the table, like she was waiting for a massage appointment, not overseeing the public execution of my life's work. They called it strategic misalignment. Said the company needed a younger, digitally native CEO to take us forward. Never mind I'd taken it from my grease-stained garage floor to national distribution with 4 factories and 300 employees. Never mind they built nothing. I watched my brother-in-law, Rick, do his smug little lean back in the chair he'd only ever sat in thanks to me. Cousin Joel even had the audacity to wink when they called the vote unanimous. I nodded politely, thanked everyone for their candor, even shook a few hands on the way out, because that's what you do when the wolves come dressed in country club polos. Security escorted me to the elevator. Clipboard guy wouldn't even look me in the eye. I smiled at him too. A nice big smile. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because they know it means something they don't understand yet. Let me say something clearly here, because I know a few of you reading this are nodding. If 98% of you are listening without subscribing, now's a good time to hit that button. It tells the team that these stories matter. And trust me, they need to hear this one to the end. Back in the parking lot, my ID badge no longer worked. My car still had the visitor's tag from when I'd parked in my own reserved spot. A woman who used to call me sir walked by and didn't even nod. Just like that, I was a ghost in a building I'd personally laid the cornerstone for. 25 years, gone in the length of a PowerPoint. But I didn't rage. Didn't go full scorched earth in the lobby or yank the fire alarm on my way out. I didn't even call my lawyer. Not that day. Instead, I drove home, past the billboards with our logo, past the industrial park I helped build. No music, no calls, just the quiet hum of a man breathing through something dangerous. When I got home, the garage light was still on. Funny how no one had ever turned it off. That garage, small, damp, filled with my first ugly sketches and busted tools, looked more sacred now than any boardroom ever did. I stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the folding table where I built the first prototype with my hands bleeding from a slipped torque wrench. That garage still smelled like sweat and WD-40. It smelled like origin. And origin stories don't end with board votes. I opened the old filing cabinet in the corner. Not the obvious one, the other one. The one with the hidden false bottom that even my wife didn't know about. Inside was a flash drive. I plugged it into the old laptop on the workbench. It took a moment to spin up, the fan coughing like a lifelong smoker. And then I opened the folder marked Failsafe Protocol. 12 subfolders. 8 legal documents. 3 encrypted contracts. 1 video. I pressed play. And there I was, 2 years younger, talking into the camera. If you're watching this, I said, they did it. They finally thought they were clever enough. Good. That means we're ready. Then I smiled. Same one I gave Rick in the boardroom. The kind that says, you may have taken the wheel, but I cut the brakes months ago. The bourbon tasted like dust. I didn't even like bourbon. Just kept the bottle there out of some nostalgic superstition. A gift from a supplier after we hit our first million in sales. He said, save it for when you feel like you've made it. I guess tonight was close enough. Or maybe it was the opposite. The garage hadn't changed. Same more pegboard with screwdrivers crookedly jammed in, like I'd get to reorganizing someday. Same cracked linoleum tiles that curled at the edges like dead leaves. My first blueprint, drawn on a diner napkin during a manic episode of Caffeine and Hope, still framed in a cheap Walmart frame, thumbtacked into drywall. The wall clock still ran 5 minutes fast, just like I liked it. Funny, I always thought if I got pushed out, I'd cry in here. Scream maybe. Punch a beam. But instead, I stood dead silent, staring at all those ghosts like I'd just come home from a war I wasn't even sure I'd won or lost. Then I saw it, taped to the underside of the shelf above my workbench. A yellowing envelope, almost brittle. My handwriting, scrawled years ago, in case of treason. I opened it with the care of someone disarming a bomb. Inside was a password. Just that. A long, ugly string of characters I'd made intentionally unmemorable. And yet I still remembered it. I dusted off the old laptop, one I'd purpose-built to be offline, air-gapped, never touched by the company network. I opened it. It groaned. The screen flickered once, then booted into a minimalist desktop with a single folder, fail-safe protocol, 12 subfolders, each with a date, a code name, and a single instruction document inside. They thought I'd been coasting the last few years, letting them handle the business end. Truth is, I've been building a shadow playbook the entire time. Not out of paranoia, though I'd lie if I said I didn't start that way, but out of pattern recognition. People don't show you who they are during the good times. They show you when money's on the table. And this family had been slowly sharpening their knives since we hit 8 figures. I clicked the folder labeled Daedalus. Legal structures. LLC registrations from Delaware, Wyoming, even one in Cyprus. A full breakdown of voting shares, clauses I had quietly inserted in contracts they'd rubber-stamped, thinking it was all boilerplate. Clauses that made ownership extremely flexible. And then the gems, 3 video messages from board meetings over the past 18 months. I had recorded them secretly, not because I needed leverage, but because I needed to remember. Every time I questioned if I was being too cynical, too cold, I'd watch Rick smirk when we discussed pay cuts for staff, or Joel's little throat-clearing tick before he lied about quarterly numbers. I walked over to the mirror, still holding the glass. The man in the reflection looked like hell. Gray streaked into his beard, deeper lines under the eyes than he remembered. But the eyes themselves, they weren't tired. They were lit, focused. I raised the glass and said out loud, "Let's see how much you learned without me." Then I drained it, put the glass down, and got to work. I wasn't grieving. I was activating. The day my brother-in-law Joel proudly cut the ribbon on our 3rd regional office, I stood 6 feet behind him, clapping like the loyal patriarch. Cameras flashing, mayor grinning, his stupid laminated name badge slightly crooked. Everyone assumed he was the genius behind the growth. Hell, I let them. I'd long since learned that in a family business, being invisible is a strength if you're willing to play long. 3 years before the vote, I started doing what no one else in that family had the patience or IQ to do: paperwork. Not the kind that gets you applause. The kind that keeps you out of jail or gives you leverage when people forget who signed the checks. I spent months setting up a spider web of holding entities. One in Delaware, because it's Delaware, of course. Another 2 in Wyoming. One in Panama, not because I needed it, but because it had confused the hell out of anyone trying to trace flow. At night, I read tax code the way other people read spy novels. Weekends, I built contracts. Quiet, surgical ones. Every time we raised funds or issued new shares, I diluted myself a bit more, on paper. Let the family bump their percentages. Rick got loud. Joel did interviews. Even my wife started using we instead of he when describing the company's origin. I let them. I encouraged them. What they didn't notice was that I'd been transferring voting rights elsewhere. A trust, Cascade Equities, owned by an LLC, Kaifall Ventures, which I'd quietly placed under the stewardship of a trustee who owed me more than money. And beneath it all, a clause that let me issue a trigger letter reclaiming operational control if certain conditions were met, say, a forced ousting of the founder, for example. They signed off on all of it. Every quarter, I'd bring up minor adjustments in shareholder agreements. They'd skim, click, nod. Joel once approved a 42-page restructuring addendum on his iPhone while mid-conference call about golf course landscaping. Rick was too busy fighting a LinkedIn war with his ex-colleagues from Bain to even open the PDFs. And my wife? She had already begun wearing the language of separation. We have different visions. He's better with early-stage stuff. Let them dream. Let them climb the pyramid while I built the trapdoor beneath it. By the time they voted me out, they thought I owned nothing. Less than 10%, according to the public filings. No blocking power. No veto rights. No board seat. Not even a formal employment contract anymore. What they didn't know, what they never thought to check, was that I still held 48.6% of the company. Not under my name. Not in any form that would ping in their budget dashboards or legal alerts. But in structure? In substance? I was still the goddamn king. I just wore a mask. I remember sitting in the garage that night, sipping a second glass of bourbon, and opening a clean spreadsheet labeled access points. Every document, every override, every protocol to flip control in less than 24 hours. And not to me. That would have been too obvious. No. The next move required a different kind of beast. One they feared more than me. But before I reached out to him, I did one last thing. I opened the shareholder registry from the last board meeting. Cross-referenced each name. Clicked compare with controlling interests. The system returned a single line in green. Cascade Equities, 48.6%, trustee activation eligible. I sat back, smiled, and whispered. They never even looked under the hood. Malcolm Glass. Just saying his name tastes like a threat. The man's a blunt instrument dressed in a Tom Ford suit. Founder of Crooked River Capital, a hedge fund with the warmth of a shark tank and roughly the same ethical code. He tried to acquire us 7 years ago. Sent his guys in smiling. Handed us an offer with a bunch of glossy buzzwords like synergy and agile scale. And I told him to pound sand without even taking the dinner meeting. That's probably why I knew he'd pick up. I didn't call. I didn't text. I sent exactly one email from a clean Proton address I hadn't used in a decade. Subject line: interested in finishing what you started? He replied in 7 minutes. Call me. We spoke after midnight. I was standing barefoot in the garage, a spreadsheet open on one screen, a burner phone pressed to my ear. The bourbon was gone. My voice was steady. I told him the exact number of shares Cascade Equities held. I told him I was ready to sign. But there was a condition. It has to be done overnight. Full transfer. No media, no leaks. NDA with teeth. He laughed the way old wolves do when they catch the scent of fresh blood. You're serious? After all these years, you're giving me the keys. You still want it? I want it, he said. But this would cost you everything. Your name. Your legacy. You realize that. I looked at the black and white family photo hanging above the breaker box. One we took outside our second warehouse. Me in the center. Joel with his fake laugh. Rick holding a baby like it was a coffee mug. My wife looking at me like I was a stepping stone. They buried that legacy already, I said flatly. He went quiet. Just long enough to remind me why I'd always respected him, even while hating his guts. I'll need confirmation of control rights. Clean transfer docs. Trigger clause language. You'll have it in 3 hours. All time-stamped. The trust is primed. The board will wake up owning nothing but stationery. He let out a breath. Not a laugh this time. Something colder. You really want to do this? I already did it. You're just the delivery guy. We ended the call without another word. No fake pleasantries. No handshake emojis. I went back to the laptop and pulled up the encrypted transfer protocols. It felt surgical, like threading a needle through multiple jurisdictions, blindfolded, with gloves on. I started the data handoff. One shell company pinged another. Verification tokens fired. Crypto signatures verified. And slowly, invisibly, my empire passed from my hands into the clutches of a man who'd once told me, "You're talented, but soft. Family makes you soft." Maybe he was right. But what the family never understood, what none of them ever grasped, is that Malcolm Glass was never my enemy. He was my weapon. And tonight, I was pulling the pin. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt like descending into a vault rather than climbing up into an office. Midnight law firms don't hum with the chaos of daytime litigation. They whisper. The kind of whisper where every syllable could ruin someone's life, and often does. The receptionist was a single guy in his 20s with tired eyes and a badge that simply read Nathan. He barely glanced up as he buzzed me in. Down the hall, one office light glowed amber. Frosted glass, no plaques. Malcolm's guy had rented the place for 6 hours, short-term, off-books, zero digital footprint. No record this meeting ever happened unless you were holding the documents in your hands. And I was. Inside sat 3 men. One lawyer, one notary, one man from Crooked River Capital who introduced himself as Tobias and didn't shake hands. I liked him already. Everything was prearranged. Cascade Equities had issued the transfer directive earlier in the evening. All 48.6% of the firm's shares had been parsed, bundled, and reallocated. The moment I signed the last line of the last document, those shares, my lifeblood, my leverage, my loaded gun, belonged to Crooked River Capital. More specifically, to a holding subsidiary they'd named DRK NXT Holdings. A nice subtle jab at the company's original name, Next Horizon. As I initialed the final page, the notary stamped it with a dull thud that sounded like a coffin lid shutting. Tobias collected the folders, checked each seal, and nodded once. Override codes? He asked. I slid over the USB stick. All embedded. Shareholder control verification, access to the legacy systems, CEO override. System locks at 8:59 a.m. Any attempt to roll back transfers without your key will flag legal escalation. Contingency. If anyone tries to claw this back through Delaware courts, a copy of the family's internal chat logs, including some very creative phrases about minorities, female executives, and certain questionable tax moves, is sitting in escrow with the Intercept. Tobias raised an eyebrow. You really dotted the I's. Wouldn't be here otherwise. We shook hands. Not the friendly kind. The kind you give before a blade goes into someone else's ribs. By 3:20 a.m., I was back in my truck. I sat in the dark garage with the engine off, watching the house stay silent. Upstairs, my wife slept under Egyptian cotton sheets, dreaming whatever people like her dream after destroying the man who made them wealthy. She didn't know yet. None of them did. At 4:45, Malcolm texted a single word. Confirmed. At 5:06, the internal server backup pushed the new board registry live. The timestamp was deliberate, just early enough that by the time their heads hit their desks and their morning coffee settled, they'd be staring at a screen they no longer recognized. At 6:10, I logged into the backdoor admin panel one last time. Not to interfere, just to watch. A ghost in the system. By 7:30, the East Coast offices were beginning to stir. Early emails. Slack messages. A scheduled Motivation Monday post drafted by Joel, full of platitudes about vision and unity. By sunrise, the company no longer belonged to anyone with my last name. It had been fed, whole and trembling, into the hands of a machine built for acquisition, optimization, and, if necessary, destruction. And not a single soul had noticed. Not yet. A silent revolution had taken place while the world slept. The family thought they'd throw me into the cold. What they didn't see was the door they'd left unlocked, and the predator I'd invited in through it. 9:01 a.m. System access down, the CFO texted. She figured it was a routine hiccup. Maybe the cloud sync was lagging. Maybe the IT intern spilled cold brew on a server again. Nothing a polite Slack ping couldn't fix. She hit refresh twice. Blank screen. She frowned, then tried to access payroll. Access denied. 9:03 a.m. Legal called IT. Straight to voicemail. No response on Teams. The guy who usually posted cat gifs every Monday morning hadn't logged in at all. Odd. They tried his personal number. Nothing. HR had marked him as checked in 30 minutes earlier. 9:05 a.m. Rick, newly crowned CEO, brother-in-law, king of buzzwords and bad ties, was already pacing in his office, Bluetooth in ear, barking about getting ahead of the Q3 narrative, when his dashboard booted him out mid-sentence. He blinked. Clicked again. Permission denied. He laughed to himself. Must be a two-factor issue. Then he looked closer. Access privileges removed. Please contact your administrator. Rick wasn't used to that phrase. Your administrator. He was the administrator. Or so he thought. 9:07 a.m. The corporate lawyer, Michelle, a sharp woman with an even sharper bob cut, logged in from her tablet. She bypassed front-end access and hit the shareholder registry back-end directly, an old habit from when she had to manually double-check filings. She froze. Her eyes moved back and forth across the screen, reading the updated ownership structure once, twice, 3 times like it was written in Sanskrit. Cascade Equities, 0%. Rick Meyer, 0%. Joel Fine, 0%. Crooked River Capital via DRK NXT Holdings, 48.6% controlling interest. Remaining shares dispersed. No block-eligible positions. She sat back in her chair and whispered, "Where did the shares go?" 9:09 a.m. The Slack channels lit up. Anyone else can't access inventory? Why does the admin portal say, "I'm a guest user"? Did we just get acquired? No one answered. Not publicly, anyway. 9:12 a.m. Joel tried calling me. 4 times in a row. Straight to voicemail. Left a panicked message that started with, "Hey, I think something's weird," and ended with, "Call me back right now." I didn't. 9:15 a.m. Malcolm Glass's personal assistant issued an internal press release through the proper legal channels, short and lethal. Effective immediately, Crooked River Capital had assumed operational control of Next Horizon Industries. No restructuring was expected, for now. A transitional evaluation period would begin immediately under the oversight of DRK NXT Holdings. The document was dated, timestamped, backed by contracts they themselves had signed and had never once read. By 9:20, Rick's LinkedIn profile still read CEO. He stared at the words like they belonged to someone else. At 9:22, Joel threw a stapler across the boardroom. 9:26, my wife texted. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I was already in the driveway, watching the sun break over the rooftops, sipping coffee from a mug that still had the company logo. I thought about throwing it, smashing it against the wall. But then again, it wasn't mine anymore. Neither was the company, and neither was theirs. 10:04 a.m. The emergency board meeting began with 6 people in the room and 12 kinds of panic in the air. No coffee, no catered muffins. Just a long, polished table covered in paper printouts and half-open laptops, all flashing the same red lockout notifications. Rick sat at the head, pale and sweating through his Vision 2025 quarter zip, barking orders to no one who could fix anything. Joel kept pacing, muttering, "This is a breach. This is fraud. This is illegal." Michelle, the lawyer, said nothing. Her eyes were locked on her tablet. Scrolling through PDFs, she couldn't believe she had drafted herself. Legal restructuring documents. Signed. Notarized. Perfectly executed. 2 years old. All of it bearing their names. At 10:11, the main monitor flickered to life. Malcolm Glass. He didn't bother with a background blur. You could see the skyline behind him. New York, of course, and the soft hiss of a high-rise air filter in the background. He wore a black button-down, no tie. Just enough to look professional while exuding full, arrogant command. A man who didn't need to posture anymore. "Gentlemen," he began, voice as smooth as it was venomous. "I'm pleased to finally be attending a board meeting of Next Horizon. I look forward to running this company better than you ever did." Silence. Rick tried to open his mouth, but Malcolm raised a single finger like a priest giving last rites. "You don't speak now. You listen." Joel slammed his fist against the table. "You can't just walk in and—" "I didn't walk in, Joel," Malcolm interrupted, eyes gleaming. "You opened the door. Years ago, in fact. I just had to wait until you were stupid enough to push out the only man who ever knew where the foundation was laid." Michelle cleared her throat. "These documents, this transfer, this can't possibly hold. It's bad faith. There was no transparency." Malcolm tilted his head. "Transparency? You mean the same way you transparently buried an illegal board vote inside a quarterly alignment session? Or how you redlined out founder protections in the bylaws while pretending to streamline governance?" He leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped into something quieter. "Hungrier. You signed off on the restructuring 2 years ago. It's airtight. I should know. I paid your firm to audit it back then. You didn't even notice." Rick finally lost it. "You think you can just steal the company? We'll sue you into the ground. We'll get injunctions, freeze orders. Hell, we'll bring in the feds." Malcolm didn't blink. "And I'll countersue you into bankruptcy. See, that's the difference between me and your little country club coup. I planned this." He turned slightly, typing something off-screen. A few seconds later, their monitors updated again. A formal notice of new board composition. Malcolm as chairman. 3 Crooked River executives listed as majority voting members. Rick's name? Gone. Joel. Pending transition review. My wife. Reduced to non-voting advisory capacity. The silence after that was thick enough to strangle. Michelle finally muttered. This was a trap. No. Malcolm corrected her, calm and precise. This was a will reading. And you just found out Daddy left it all to someone else. He ended the call. The screen went black. No one spoke. Rick slumped into the chair like a deflated parade balloon. Joel stared at the polished surface of the table as if it might offer him a portal out of this nightmare. Michelle closed her laptop slowly. "This isn't recoverable," she said, almost to herself. "They laid the landmines under our feet 2 years ago. We just danced right over them." Outside, the office phones began to ring. Not the usual chirps. These were long, slow, deliberate rings. Shareholders. Press. Banks. By 10:30, the walls were closing in. And somewhere, not far from that room, I was sitting in silence. Listening. Watching. Drinking coffee from a chipped mug. The kind you keep after a funeral. She showed up just after 9 p.m., headlights sweeping across the driveway like searchlights. I didn't move. Just watched from the living room window, still in the same shirt I'd worn while finalizing the asset control protocols. It smelled faintly of old bourbon and printer ink. She hesitated before getting out of the car. Still wore the same cream blazer from the board meeting. Wrinkled now. Hair pulled back, but strands falling loose, like her armor was failing, piece by piece. She climbed the steps like they were heavier than she remembered. I opened the door before she could knock. For a long second, she didn't say anything. Just stared at me like I was some artifact unearthed from a time capsule. I didn't offer a smile. Didn't offer her inside. Just stood there, one hand on the frame, letting the night do the talking. "You planned this," she said finally. No accusation in her voice. No bite. Just a quiet realization unraveling in real time. I looked at her. "You voted yes." Her breath caught. Just a small hitch, barely noticeable. But I noticed. She stepped closer. "I didn't know they'd. Rick told me it was just temporary. A restructure. I thought you'd be brought back after." After I learned my lesson? I said, with a flick of sarcasm so sharp it cut the air between us. She winced, and for a moment I saw the cracks in her foundation. Not guilt, not remorse, confusion. As if she couldn't quite compute that someone she underestimated could still surprise her. I gave 30 years to that company, I said, quieter now. Build it with my hands while you all rebranded it into your cocktail party talking point. She looked down at her shoes, whispered, I never wanted it to go this far. I leaned against the doorframe. You didn't want it to go this far, or you didn't think I could? That landed. I saw it. She tried to find something in her bag of tricks, empathy, maybe. Memory. We built a life together. Do you remember the nights in the first office? On that futon, when we didn't even have payroll covered and we'd eat tuna out of cans and write invoices by hand? I finished. Yeah, I remember. I remember doing that while you were texting your brothers about selling me out to venture capital 2 years later. Now she looked up, eyes wet. It wasn't like that. You were becoming isolated, paranoid. You didn't trust anyone because you were giving me reasons not to. She stepped forward again. So this is revenge? You torched the family just to prove a point. No, I said. This isn't revenge. This is consequence. And then she broke. Tears came. Real ones, maybe. Maybe not. Her voice cracked. You think I don't care? That this didn't hurt me? I lost everything today. I looked her dead in the eye. You lost something you never earned. That was the moment. The instant her face hardened. Like glass turning to stone. Guilt had failed, so now came the second act, fury. You always needed to be the hero, she snapped. You couldn't handle not being the center of gravity. That's what this is. But I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just let the silence stretch until it snapped. And then, without another word, I closed the door. She stood there for a few more seconds, maybe waiting for the handle to turn. It didn't. Behind the door, I leaned against the wall. Not in relief. Not in pain. Just stillness. This was never just a business play. This was surgery. And some cuts bleed longer than others. But once the rot sets in, you don't mourn it. You excise it. Joel was the first to go. Officially, it was a mutual separation agreement. Unofficially, it was Malcolm handing him a one-sentence ultimatum in the middle of a Wednesday. Resign quietly, or we open the books on your discretionary spending. I didn't see it happen, but I heard he didn't even pack up his office, just left through the side entrance with a gym bag and a half-finished protein shake. Rick lasted 2 more weeks, squirming through strategy calls and delivering toothless pep talks to a workforce that already knew the wolves were in the building. When Malcolm finally called him into a private performance review, it took less than 10 minutes. No press release. No farewell email. One moment he was the face of the company. The next, his badge deactivated mid-lunch. The rest followed like dominoes. Her cousin Stacy, director of talent culture, was escorted out when they discovered her department hadn't done a single compliance audit in 3 fiscal quarters. Marcus, VP of growth, whatever the hell that meant, suddenly found himself ghosted from all calendar invites, then booted from the Slack workspace with the rest of the deadweight. The logo changed next. Just a minor design update at first. Sleeker, colder. Then came the new name, NXT Glass Holdings. Real subtle. Real final. The Chicago office shut down after Q1. Atlanta didn't make it to Q2. Rumor was they were consolidating operations into one building and subleasing the rest. The same buildings her family once bragged about scaling into new markets with. Now they were just liabilities with rent overdue. I didn't even have to lift a finger. That was the part that made it all so clean. I'd already passed the torch technically, legally, morally. Malcolm ran the show now. And when you put a hammer in a shark's hand, you don't have to tell him where to swing. I just watched from the outside. Heard whispers. Joel's second mortgage? Foreclosed. Rick's startup venture? Quietly dissolved after 2 angel investors pulled out within days of the acquisition going public. Cousin Stacy? Rebranding herself on LinkedIn as a wellness and leadership consultant. One of those bios that screams desperation wrapped in affirmations. My wife, my estranged wife, filed for separation 3 weeks after the dust settled. Not for love, not for truth. For distance. She thought if she got far enough away from the blast radius, her professional credibility might survive. She even pitched herself to a nonprofit. Got politely declined. No one wanted the stink of it on them. Meanwhile, I spent my days fishing, reading, rewiring the garage into a personal lab. Even bought myself a ridiculous espresso machine just because I never let myself have one when I was CEO. It hissed like a dragon and steamed milk like a locomotive. I named it Joel. Sometimes, people in the industry reached out. A cautious, just checking in, or heard you step down. Any plans? I thanked them, said I was resting, recalibrating, but no one mentioned what really happened. Not out loud, because they didn't have to. They knew. Everyone knew. You could see it in the nervous side eyes at industry events, in the abrupt silence when my name came up. Like I was the ghost of consequence, a man who'd been wronged and didn't scream, just erased. The beauty of it all? My silence was the message. I didn't leak anything, didn't trash anyone in the press. No op-eds, no vengeance speeches, just vacuum. And it ate them alive. Because when you betray a builder, and he burns the blueprint before walking away, you're not left with nothing. You're left with what you built. And if it turns out you never build a damn thing, then all you really have is what you can sell. The ballroom was flooded with the usual suspects. Venture capital clingers, PR slick founders, startup mascots in sneakers pretending to be billionaires. A jazz trio noodled in the corner like they were being paid not to be noticed. I stood near the edge of the bar, sipping a drink I didn't like but couldn't name, watching the crowd try to remember who they were without their LinkedIn titles. 6 weeks since the transfer. 6 weeks since I set a quiet fire that no one could put out. And for the first time in years, I didn't need to shake hands. I didn't need to pitch. I didn't need to matter. I'd already done what I came to do. I was halfway through my drink when I saw him. Michelle's boss. Led counsel for the family board. The same man who drafted the vote that forced me out. Now wearing a tux 2 sizes too tight and a panic sweat too thin to hide. His eyes locked on mine like a deer spotting the edge of a cliff mid-sprint. He stumbled over. No intro. No hello. Just the look of a man haunted by the math that didn't add up. You sold to glass? I let the question hang in the air. Then I sipped my drink. One slow, deliberate motion. And I said it. Quiet enough for just him to hear. At 9 a.m., I smiled. His face drained like someone had pulled the plug on his circulatory system. Sheet white. Jaw slack. The lights in the ballroom danced behind him while he stood there frozen, like the ghost of a man who realized the grave had been dug years before he ever picked up a shovel. I walked away without waiting for a response. Some revenge is loud. It bellows, it shouts, it demands attention. But the most effective kind? It's silent, strategic, and absolutely irreversible. What I love about this story isn't the revenge itself, it's how it was done. This was a man who didn't beg, didn't lash out, didn't even yell. He just watched, waited, and pulled a single, silent thread that unraveled everyone who underestimated him. There's something deeply satisfying in that kind of restraint, and terrifying, too.